You know, you spend 30 years fighting crime, walking tight ropes between good and evil, and what you really dream of, what you count the days down for, is a little slice of peace, right? I sold my condo in the city, hung up my badge for the final time, and moved out here to the Cascades Reserve, a gated community by the lake, thinking, this is it, Frank. Retirement. Security. Silence. The silence I craved was less about the absence of sound and more about the absence of drama. No more late-night calls. No more bureaucratic tug-of-wars with the city council. Just me, a fishing rod, and the lapping water. Man, was I wrong. That sense of peace lasted exactly 12 hours. By the time I woke up the next morning, the HOA monster had already reared its perfectly manicured head. I bought the house from the estate of a very dear friend who passed, and yeah, it came with the standard homeowners association, the HOA. I dealt with bureaucratic nonsense my entire career, the kind of red tape that could choke a rhino, so I figured, how bad could a few neighborhood rules be? They were, after all, just rules about aesthetics and upkeep. Famous last words, folks. Turns out, my quiet lakeside retreat was governed by a self-appointed, clipboard-wielding tyrant named Vera Harrington, and she was just getting started. She didn't see an association, she saw a fiefdom, and she was the undisputed queen. The very first night I was there, still unpacking boxes marked hazardous materials from the old storage locker, my doorbell rang. I opened it, and there she stood, Vera Harrington. Mid-50s, sharp, almost aggressively perfect bob haircut, wearing a look that said she wasn't here to offer a casserole, but to issue a citation. She didn't look like a neighbor. She looked like a tax auditor with a vendetta. She had this laminated, spiral-bound welcome packet, which, by the way, felt less like a comprehensive guide and more like a thinly veiled constitution of threats, complete with capital letters and excessive bolding. She didn't introduce herself so much as she launched into a full-scale legal review. Mr. Miller, I'm Vera Harrington, president of the association. And while we welcome new residents, we expect immediate compliance. Your curtains, are those approved beige, or are they a non-compliant taupe? Be aware that taupe absorbs more heat, which can lead to premature fading of the exterior paint, a violation of Article 4, Section 6. Your lawn must be maintained at 2.5 inches, not a millimeter more or less, and we mean precisely 2.5 inches, enforced by quarterly spot checks. And guest parking is strictly limited to 4 hours, enforced by automated ticketing and wheel clamping after a 15-minute grace period. She spoke with this irritating, measured cadence, like she was reading the Gettysburg Address, but it was just nonsense about curtains. I just stood there, trying to be the polite retired guy, not the chief of police who could spot a control freak from a mile away. Ma'am, I said, trying to hold on to my smile. I literally just moved in. I haven't even found my coffee maker yet, let alone picked out the perfect FAA-approved shade of drapery. I promise I'll read through this massive packet tomorrow, but for tonight, I'm just getting settled. Her eyes narrowed to slits, and trust me, I've seen that exact look on hardened criminals right before they realize they've been boxed in. It's the look of someone whose authority has been questioned, whose internal structure of control has been jostled, and it's ugly. We expect compliance immediately, Mr. Miller. Ignorance is not immunity in the Cascades Reserve, and delays will result in compounding fines. And she pivoted on her heel and marched away, the crisp clap of her designer shoes echoing in the quiet night, leaving me standing there with 100 pages of architectural guidelines and a profound, sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew, right then, that my peaceful retirement was going to be a war of attrition, and my opponent viewed war as meticulous documentation and strategic annoyance. Vera spent the next 6 weeks dedicated to making my life a petty hell. It wasn't just a list, it was a crusade, a psychological operation aimed squarely at my former life's commitment to order. It was the constant stream of violation notices, one for my unapproved shade of blue on the recycle bin, a color she claimed caused visual disharmony with the terracotta roof tiles. Another for having an unauthorized planter on my front porch, which was a ceramic pot I'd owned for 20 years, but apparently, its glaze didn't match the community's approved color palette. Every day, it was something. I started to wonder if she had mounted a webcam on a tree just outside my property line, or if she was conducting surveillance from an attic window across the street. The conflict wasn't just about the rules. It was about power, and she clearly saw my background as a cop, my quiet self-sufficiency, as a direct, unacceptable challenge to her reign. She needed everyone under her thumb. Every fence post painted the right shade, and the ex-chief of police wasn't bowing to her little kingdom. It escalated quickly. My grown daughter, Clara, stopped by one afternoon to drop off groceries, a 5-minute trip. 2 days later, a notice arrived. Unauthorized visitor vehicle exceeding the 4-hour parking limit. The timestamp showed the car parked at 14:02 and leaving at 14:07. 5 minutes. I called Vera, trying one last time to appeal to reason. Vera. I kept my voice flat, holding the rage in check. Clara was here for 5 minutes. You are wasting everyone's time, including the HOA's, by processing this ludicrous violation. She actually sniffed, a perfect little sound of superior disdain. Procedure is procedure, Mr. Miller. The system flagged the license plate. If you wish to dispute it, follow the appeals process outlined in Section 7B. That process, by the way, requires a non-refundable $25 administrative fee. Then there was the bird feeder edict. I installed a simple, wooden bird feeder near the back fence, nothing fancy. A week later, a registered letter arrived. It wasn't about the feeder itself, which was technically allowed, but about the seed I was using. She claimed the sunflower seeds were attracting non-compliant wildlife, specifically citing a family of squirrels and a very large, rowdy blue jay, whose aggressive calls, she argued, violated the community's quiet enjoyment clause. She even included grainy photos of the blue jay. This wasn't oversight. This was pathological obsession. But the real, defining moment where I realized I was dealing with true mental instability was the mailbox incident. I woke up one morning and saw a shadow on my driveway. I looked out the window, and there was Vera Harrington, kneeling in my yard, holding a measuring tape. A bright yellow one, for maximum visibility. She was measuring the height of my mailbox post, meticulously, using a small level to ensure it was plumb. I walked outside, coffee mug in hand, just staring. The sheer absurdity of it made me feel like I was watching a hidden camera show. She didn't even flinch. Good morning, Vera. Enjoying the scenic view? Found any non-compliant fungi this morning. She looked up, annoyed that I had interrupted her sacred work. This post, Mr. Miller, appears to be 72 inches, while the covenants clearly state a maximum of 70. This constitutes a Grade A violation, punishable by a minimum $50 fine per day, retroactive to your closing date. I just shook my head, walked back inside, and paid the fine immediately, not because I cared about 2 inches or $50, but because I knew arguing was giving her exactly what she wanted: my time, my energy, my rage. The moment I paid, she lost her leverage. I decided then and there that I had to handle this like a high-level sting operation, using my police training against her predictable, rule-obsessed nature. Vera was going to fall into her own trap, and I just needed to set the bait. And that brings us to the Saturday. The day I got my justice, served hot. I had a few former colleagues, Detective Reynolds, Sergeant Davies, and Officer Chun, over that morning. It was an informal gathering, mostly coffee and donuts, where we were kicking around some ideas for a community safety outreach program we were planning to launch independently. We were spread out in the living room, papers and laptops open. Nothing official, just old friends talking shop in my living room, strategizing over coffee. Now, here's the bait. I had foolishly, or perhaps strategically, parked my personal SUV, which still has the PD decals faintly visible under the paint job, right in the driveway, and I made sure my utility belt was draped carelessly over a chair near the window. The real giveaway, though, was Sergeant Davies' fully marked, official patrol vehicle. We agreed to park it right outside the gate, totally visible, just where the public street met the community boundary. I knew that sight. A marked patrol car in her jurisdiction, without her personal invitation, would be like ringing the dinner bell for Vera's violation radar. It was a clear, unmistakable challenge to her authority. Around 9:30 a.m., Reynolds, who was facing the side window with a perfect view of the approach, nudged me and suppressed a smile. Hey, Frank, you expecting a visitor with a clipboard? Someone's doing a commando crawl near your hydrangea bush. They seemed to be casing the joint, looking very suspicious. I looked out. Sure enough, I saw a familiar silhouette hovering near my side gate, peering around my car, trying to be inconspicuous while failing miserably. I didn't recognize the creeping, but I recognized the aggressive bob haircut. It was Vera. "Nope," I whispered back, my voice barely audible, a slow, predatory grin spreading across my face. The years of quiet frustration were finally boiling over. "But I think we just got a house call, and I bet she didn't call first." We all went quiet. The professional tension in the room was palpable. You could feel the air pressure drop. This was the moment we'd anticipated. The three of them, all trained professionals, immediately went into silent assessment mode, moving as if on instinct. A minute later, we heard it. That distinct, tiny scrape of metal against metal, right at the front door. Not a knock, not a ring. Just that horrifying, invasive sound of someone messing with your lock, violating your personal boundary. Then, the definite, heavy thunk of a key sliding into the tumbler. Click, click, click. Someone on the other side was physically unlocking my private residence. I put my coffee mug down. The sudden silence, broken only by the clatter of ceramic, was almost deafening. I signaled to the guys, a subtle, almost imperceptible nod towards the entryway. Reynolds and Davies peeled off instantly, moving with the quiet efficiency of ghosts, melting into the deep shadows on either side of the front hall. Chin stayed near the couch, phone quietly filming, his hand resting instinctively near his sidearm. I positioned myself directly behind the officers, waiting, watching the door handle slowly begin to turn. My mind was clear. This wasn't an inspection. This was a break-in, plain and simple, and we were about to catch her red-handed, with 3 witnesses and video evidence. The tumblers clicked. She was in. The handle twisted, and the door opened inward, just enough for a person to squeeze through. And there she was, Vera Harrington, clipboard in one hand, wearing a triumphant, self-righteous expression, looking like a judge stepping into a criminal's lair for a surprise audit. She took one confident step inside, her eyes scanning the room, undoubtedly expecting to find a major violation, maybe a rogue garden gnome, a stack of unauthorized lumber, or a non-standard welcome mat. She saw the couch, the donuts, the coffee table. Then her eyes tracked upward, focusing on the human figures in the hallway. And her world, the small, highly controlled kingdom she had built on the shaky foundation of the HOA bylaws, collapsed around her in a single, devastating moment. She froze, mid-stride, hands still gripping the doorknob. Her jaw physically unhinged, dropping into a perfect O of shock. Standing directly in front of her were 3 uniformed, stone-faced police officers, Sergeant Davies, Detective Reynolds, and Officer Chun. 3 men who understood the difference between a community rule and a state felony. And standing right behind them, arms crossed, smiling this tight, cold smile, was me, Frank Miller, the man she thought she could intimidate with a threat packet. Sergeant Davies was the first to speak, his voice calm, level, and utterly official, cutting through the silence like a razor. "Ma'am," he said, and you could hear the click of the professional cop taking over. "You just entered a private residence without the owner's permission. We need to know who you are and what your legal justification is for this entry. Right now." Vera stammered, her authority dissolving into pure adrenaline. I have authority," she gasped, gripping her clipboard like a lifeline. "This property, it falls under the jurisdiction of the Cascades Reserve Homeowners Association. I am the president. This is an official inspection." Reynolds, a man who appreciates legal accuracy, raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow, his voice laced with mocking politeness. "An official inspection, I see. By what authority, ma'am? So, you have a warrant, then? Issued by a judge? Signed by a magistrate of the county court?" Her face went from the familiar, ruddy red of petty entitlement to the sickly, translucent ghost white of pure, unadulterated panic. She shook her head desperately, the bob haircut barely moving. "No, but the HOA keeps a master key for emergency inspections. Community safety demands it." I stepped forward, moving past the officers and crossing the line from homeowner to the former chief, ensuring I filled her entire field of vision. I didn't raise my voice. I just lowered it, making the question feel like a cross-examination in court. "And what exact emergency would that be, Vera? Did you smell smoke? Hear screams? See a gas leak? Or did you just see a patrol car, a legal vehicle, and decide that your perceived authority gave you the right to forcibly breach the home of a fellow resident? Explain the emergency that allowed you to violate the Fourth Amendment. She gulped, a massive, audible sound that was the last pathetic gasp of her authority. Well, there were reports, suspicious activity. I saw the patrol cars. I thought something was wrong. Something is wrong, I said, leaning in just slightly, making her retreat an inch. And it's your understanding of the law. You just committed criminal trespass, Vera. An unlawful entry. That shiny clipboard you're clutching does not override the Constitution. She blinked rapidly, tears of frustration, not remorse, welling up. You can't charge me. I'm the HOA president. It was a check on community standards. I'm protecting our investment. Officer Chun, usually the quietest and most observant, let out a tiny, dry chuckle, a small, perfect sound of derision. That's not a legal title, ma'am. It's a volunteer position in a private corporation. And it definitely doesn't grant you immunity from breaking and entering, which is a state crime. That's when she broke. The cold, hard reality of the situation, the uniforms, the sharp legal terminology, the camera silently recording her confession, the realization that the man she had been harassing was not just a homeowner, but a law enforcement veteran, hit her like a freight train. Her clipboard slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto my hardwood floor, scattering a dozen meticulously documented violation notices everywhere. She started babbling, incoherent excuses about procedures, bylaws, and her rights, which she now seemed to have completely forgotten. Sergeant Davies cut her off, his face impassive but firm. Ma'am, that's enough. Please step outside. We all followed her onto the porch, maintaining professional distance, where the real legal formality began. I made it crystal clear to Davies and Reynolds. I was pressing full criminal charges. She screamed, right there on my porch, for the entire quiet community to hear. You can't do this. I was protecting the HOA property. This is harassment. Vera, I said, looking her dead in the eye, savoring the finality of the moment. This is my property. And you lost your authority the moment you decided your $2 key and your clipboard were better than a judge's warrant. Within minutes, the scene was surreal. Vera Harrington, the self-proclaimed queen of the Cascades Reserve, was sitting on the curb, sobbing into a damp tissue, a police officer patiently taking down her statement. She frantically tried to call her husband, Roger, hoping he would materialize with a lawyer, but turns out, he was at the country club, enjoying a round of golf, and he didn't pick up. Typical. A tyrant with no army to back her up. The officers were thorough and professional. They didn't handcuff her. She was trembling enough already, her composure completely shattered. But they issued her citations for criminal trespass and unlawful entry. They photographed her right there, sitting on my curb, for the official record, and she was immediately served with paperwork banning her from any and all HOA management activities pending the outcome of the investigation. The pathetic, tiresome reign of Vera was unequivocally over. Here's the delicious kicker, the final, perfect piece of irony that closed the case for me and explained her madness. That afternoon, her mortified husband, Roger, showed up at my door, tie slightly askew, looking like he'd aged 10 years on the golf course. He was sweating, genuinely embarrassed, and he apologized profusely, trying to explain that his wife had been under severe, debilitating stress due to the upcoming annual general meeting and a recent audit. Then he confessed the truth about the master key, confirming my deepest suspicions. Roger explained, quietly, almost shamefully, that the HOA did have an emergency master key, but it was only for common facilities. The pool shed, the maintenance closet, the community clubhouse, not private homes. The CC and RS were crystal clear about that constitutional right. Vera hadn't been given the key. She hadn't been authorized to use it. She had stolen it from the maintenance lockbox weeks ago, convinced that her perceived authority gave her the right to inventory my house because of a patrol car she didn't like. Her motivation wasn't community safety. It was the desperate, final act of a petty tyrant trying to prove her power to the one person who refused to acknowledge it. She was protecting her ego, not the property values. So, I finally got my piece. Vera resigned, or was forced out by the collective relief of the community, in disgrace a week later, and now we have a new, much quieter HOA president who actually believes in things like privacy and due process. But the story has always stuck with me. A powerful lesson on how easily people can confuse a small, volunteer position with true, legitimate authority, and how that small measure of control can corrupt absolutely. The moment she crossed that threshold and turned the lock, she went from HOA president to common criminal, and I was just lucky enough to have a front row seat, with a few professional witnesses, to watch her petty kingdom crumble, right there on my own welcome mat. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What is it about these small pockets of power, these little organizations, that attracts people who want to control every single aspect of their neighbors' lives? Is it sheer boredom? Is it a deep-seated inferiority complex that can only be satisfied by exerting bureaucratic power? Or just a desperate need to exert control over someone, anyone, when they feel powerless in the wider world? Whatever the reason, remember, your property lines are a boundary, and no clipboard can cross it without a warrant. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you ever had a run-in with an HOA tyrant, a condo board dictator, or maybe a neighbor who thought they owned the block? What was the craziest violation you ever received? Drop your stories. I'm genuinely curious if any of them top breaking and entering with a clipboard and a stolen key. And hey, if you enjoyed this story about finding peace the hard way, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the life of a retired chief. Until next time, stay safe and lock your doors, especially against the people who are supposed to be protecting your community.